All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing a reaction video to one of the better or best YouTube channels on YouTube that covers Bruce Lee content. There's a number of channels out there that embellish and just go crazy with wild stories. I found this guy to be one of the more authentic. And the reason you might be wondering why we're going to cover Bruce Lee, well, we do talk about self-defense here on this channel. In the past, we focused a lot on spiritual self-defense, and we've realized that we need to shore that up, especially with the way politics are rolling and things and people being physically attacked and so on. We really need to kind of shift gears here and focus more on physical protection. So I thought, why not focus on the man, the myth, the legend, Bruce Lee himself. Obviously, I'm a big, huge Bruce Lee fan. In one of my other videos, you saw how many books I have. Literally just a couple feet from me, I have stacks and stacks of martial art books, and I have many of his books, if not every one he ever published, I believe. So we're gonna jump straight into this video because it's a bit of a long one, and we're gonna be reacting to it just so we can kind of get some context. In this video, you're gonna be learning about a gentleman named Joe Louis, who is also one of the most well-respected, or was one of the most well-respected martial arts in the history of the world. This gentleman specialized in karate, Okinawan karate, but you're going to find out that he crossed paths with Bruce Lee. And not only did he cross paths with Bruce Lee, he actually learned quite a bit from Bruce Lee. So let's jump straight in here. I'm going to be stopping it from time to time to give it a little bit of my commentary when I see things and call things out as well, to kind of, give you my perspective. So without further ado, let's jump straight into this reaction.
Bruce Lee versus Joe Louis is one of those what if fights that fans from the blood and guts karate era love to debate. What if Bruce Lee had chosen Joe Louis for the role of Colt in Way of the Dragon instead of Chuck Norris? How would that fight have looked? But more importantly, hey, we know that the two of them trained together. Did they spar together? What would those sparring sessions have been like?
AI.
Which one of them would have come out on top? Well, what if I told you that these two actually did have a real fight that only a few people witnessed? I know there's a lot of stories floating around the internet from people who claim to be knowledgeable Bruce Lee fans, but I want to tell y'all what really happened when Bruce Lee fought Joe Louis. What's up, y'all? My name is Prince, and this is GoldenBell Training, where we like to separate the facts from the fiction, especially when it comes to Bruce Lee.
And every day, I practice martial arts, you see?
And since we're talking about fiction, I wanted to hit you guys with some facts after seeing a lot of fiction being posted about Bruce Lee having several fights with Joe Louis. And you don't have to guess who it is posting all of these fake stories.
Hey everybody, it's Birdie here. What's going on, guys?
Well, regardless of whether Beardy posts his brand of Bruceploitation or not, there actually are a lot of misconceptions regarding Bruce Lee's relationship with Joe Louis. So I hope that I can clear up some of those misconceptions.
Were you guys aware of who Joe Louis is or was? Like, did you know? Because honestly, I did not know. I was not the big a fan of karate like that. I took karate when I was very, very, very young and just did not finish it. And I had no idea who Joe Louis was. I wasn't big on karate. I was more into Kung Fu, and I was reading a lot of Bruce Lee stuff. Yeah, so I would put down below, like, did you know who Joe Louis was? Did you study his stuff? Was he the man as far as you're concerned?
Debunk some of these myths running rampant on YouTube, and then tell you all about a story that's been kept under wraps for decades, and that's the real fight that happened between Bruce Lee and Joe Louis. But before we dive into what actually happened in their secret fight, hey, let's take a moment to look at who Joe Louis really was and why his legacy with Bruce Lee is so controversial. I mean, think about it. Bruce Lee, some call him the king of Kung Fu. Even Joe Louis called him the greatest martial artist of all time.
I considered him by far the greatest.
So what happens when the GOAT crossed hands with Joe Louis, the father of American kickboxing and the man known as the greatest karate fighter of all time?
See, if this is Joe Louis right here, like that right there looks a lot like Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do stance. So we're gonna go further in here, but that looks a lot like Jeet Kune Do to me. And if you guys are Jeet Kune Do heads, you would already know immediately like that's Bruce Lee stuff. So he definitely picked some things up.
Hey y'all, this dude Joe Louis was no slouch at all. Do you know how great Joe Louis was? I mean, besides being considered the greatest karate fighter of his era.
See, there it is again. That crouch stance, like there's a reason for this. For you fighters out here, you already know this. I'll be preaching to the choir, but for people who are just looking at this for the first time, not understanding fighting and things, first off, he's keeping his body low. So this guy has to actually punch down. When you punch down, it opens up angles. For my boxers out there, you know how angles work. You know how shifting and turning and getting yourself to work in different angles, how that works. So that forces him, even though he's not going to be a boxer, it forces him to kind of overreach and create openings and things. But another thing is that his guard, he has other options with his guard, and he can move his head off the center line easier. The worst thing you want to do is kind of honestly be upright like this guy is, where you're sitting, where your head is stuck on the center line. So when he wants to attack, you really don't have any options right here. It's easy for you to get hit. So I did see Joe Louis hit somebody pretty quickly in the face in the earlier part of this video. It's likely because the guy was stuck up here and not moving, not being in a situation where he's slightly crouched. If you look at some of the more modern boxers today, Floyd Money Mayweather, what do you see? How do you see the difference in the style that Joe Louis is doing, which in my opinion is adapted from Jeet Kune Do? This is very similar to the Philly Shell as well, guys. What do you think? For my boxers out there and for the guys who are anti Bruce Lee, look at that. Is that not Philly Shell? Is that not some of the DNA of Philly Shell? Let's continue.
And of all time, he was the inspiration for Ken Masters in the Street Fighter games. But then, well, what about Bruce Lee? I mean, Bruce Lee basically inspired all fighting games. In Enter the Dragon, all of the greatest martial artists in the world are brought together by this shadow organization to come to Han's Island to battle it out. But it turned out to be a way for Han to recruit people into his organization. And then what about the Game of Death? In that movie, Bruce has to fight a different master on each level of this temple in order to progress. And he has to use a different method to beat them as they get progressively more difficult. So when you think about Enter the Dragon and Game of Death, it basically sounds like every fighting game that's ever been made. So that's how great both of these guys were. But Bruce, I mean, Bruce Lee was just on another level as far as his impact on not just martial arts, but also on pop culture. So of course, with that level of impact, it's only natural that someone as iconic as Bruce Lee would have myths following them that make the legend of Bruce Lee greater than the actual person. I mean, it's only natural to slightly embellish the details of a story about Bruce Lee. Look, I'd say it's human. All of us do it. But there's a difference between slight embellishments and then straight up lying about Bruce Lee. And that's what I've seen happening too much on YouTube with the two largest channels that focus on Bruce Lee content. An example of a story that has misled a lot of people is this video put out by both the Bruce Lee Real Fight channel and Beardy Bruce Lee Central, where they claim that Joe Louis was part of Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch demonstration at the 1967 Long Beach Internationals.
Okay, so this is the famous Bruce Lee versus Joe Louis footage.
Bruce Lee invited Joe Louis on stage again to demonstrate the real 1-inch punch.
And Beardy claimed that after Joe Louis won the championship at that tournament, well, Bruce Lee was so impressed that he invited Joe to watch his exhibition. And during Bruce's exhibition, Joe Louis decided to participate by demonstrating a karate punch in contrast with Bruce Lee's 6-inch Jeet Kune Do punch. And according to Beardy, Joe Louis was so impressed by Bruce's demonstration and his philosophy that he switched from Okinawan karate to Jeet Kune Do right there on the spot in 1967. But this isn't true. Joe Louis didn't win the grand championship at the Long Beach Internationals. I think he got disqualified, and I don't even know if Joe Louis was even present for Bruce's demonstration on the next day. The person wearing the gi in that part of Bruce Lee's demonstration was actually a student of Chuck Norris's. You could tell by the uniform that he's wearing. But it was also confirmed by Mito Uhara, the founder of Black Belt Magazine, in an article that he wrote about that tournament. And well, Beardy didn't just stop there with his fake stories about Bruce Lee and Joe Louis. He went on to say that, well, when Bruce Lee finally approached Joe about training with him after Joe Louis won June Reed's 1968 Nationals, that Joe's response was that they needed to have a real fight to test the validity of Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. And this fight, it was supposed to be a real confrontation, not just sparring, and it was intended to test Bruce Lee's abilities and the effectiveness of Jeet Kune Do against traditional karate. Joe Louis reportedly wanted this fight to verify if Bruce Lee was as formidable as he was reputed to be.
He basically wanted to
Oh my gosh, I almost need to go back, guys. I definitely want to show you this. We're talking about
test Bruce Lee to see if
getting your head off the center line. Like, look at this. As if this is not Floyd Mayweather's Philly shell. I don't know what is, right? Come on, guys, talk to me. Put your comments down below. You see how his head is going off the center line. You see how that arm. You see how he's literally got that arm going. Like this is literally some of the DNA of Philly shell. He's moving off the center line. He's ready to counterpunch, and that's what he's doing here. Like, for you guys who don't believe that Bruce Lee could fight, and for you guys who think he was just TV, like you can see the DNA of the best fighters we have today in what he's doing. And because he predated them, it's not even a stretch of the imagination to assume that fighters like Floyd Money Mayweather were influenced by his style. It's right there for you. Just look at this.
Formidable as he was reputed to be.
he basically wanted to test Bruce Lee to see if he really is this guy that everyone is talking about.
Now, question for you guys. If Joe Louis was so impressed by Bruce Lee at the Long Beach Internationals in 1967 that he decided to train with him,
the 1-inch punch here, right? Because a lot of you guys see the 1-inch punch and then you be like, oh, that can't be possible. First off, there's a number of things going on with this 1-inch punch. First off, we'll talk about Bruce Lee's his footwork here, because again, for you fighters out there, I'm already preaching to the choir. For you guys who was just learning, footwork. Literally, footwork is like 70% of this as far as generating power. Like, it's so important. Bruce Lee, as someone who owns many of his books, again, just literally steps away from me. Like, I can literally reach over here and grab a whole bunch of the books. Like, literally, I've got his Jeet Kune Do right here with me right now. Like, I'm not playing. Like I'm not some dude who's like on the internet lying like what he's talking about. Like, I've read his techniques. Like, so what I'm telling you is that he studied fencing, and hopefully you guys know what fencing is. Fencing requires a lot of footwork because you need to be able to extend your reach, but also keep your body from getting hit. And he talked about in his Jeet Kune Do book, he talked about generating power using his foot alignment. So very similar to how a boxer would kind of almost fall into his punches the proper way to be able to generate that power. A fencer would align his body so he's creating one almost stiff foil in one direction to get more power and more speed and more thrust. When you look at Bruce Lee's movements here, this situation, he's pushing, move myself. He's generating so much power from this floor here. And then also that noise that Bruce Lee makes every time, that noise you hear, again, for my boxers, you already know this, right? But if you're not a boxer, you don't understand why they make a noise. Some of you guys might just think it was style or flair. When a boxer's going, it's for timing, but it's also to tense up all the muscles in the body at one time to create one powerful push. So when Bruce is doing this, he likely made a noise, and he uses these stiff muscles of the calf muscles, his leg muscles, his abdominals and everything to push this force from the ground, generating all the power that was responsible for this man flying back. And then lastly, I'm going to mention the last thing here, and I'm trying to be impartial, I'm trying to be fair here. Stance, footwork. Again, I said it was 60% of a fight. That also means for your defense. This gentleman is standing straight up and down, right? Look at the way his feet are. These feet are going to allow him to be pushed over like a rag doll. His feet are not like Bruce's, which means he can't absorb any force and push it into the ground. He literally will just fall over like a stick, fall straight over. So this is likely to create more of a dramatic situation with this punch. And I hope that dispelled, the myth of it, so that way you guys understand all the mechanics of this, and that yes, he is generating this amount of force. However, this gentleman isn't in a proper footwork situation to be able to absorb that force, which is why he goes back into this chair. So this 1-inch punch demonstration was set up to ask this guy to be like this. Otherwise, he would have gone into an actual fighting stance in which he can absorb some of this force. Let's continue.
At the Long Beach Internationals in 1967 that he decided to train with him. Well, why did they fight each other after Joe won at June Reed's tournament in 1968 in order for Joe to decide that he needed to train with Bruce Lee?
None of these details added up at all.
Well, the stories don't stop there. Apparently, Bruce Lee and Joe Louis had a big fight in the locker room at Joe Louis's gym. Now, pay no attention to the part where Joe Louis worked out at Chuck Norris's school and he didn't have a gym of his own. But, those kinds of details aren't important in a Beardy story. What is important is that an unknown source confirmed that Bruce Lee and Joe Louis had a fight in the locker room. Joe was seen leaving all bloodied up, and all he said was, "He got me."
A bloodied up Joe Louis walks out the door and he just says, "He got me, he got me."
Later, Bruce was seen leaving the same locker room with bloody knuckles. Oh, and at some point, Bruce Lee and Joe Louis had the first MMA fight in Bruce Lee's backyard. And guess what, y'all? Beardy managed to secure the only existing footage of their fight. But beyond the clickbait headlines and YouTube myths, the truth about Bruce Lee and Joe Louis's relationship was much more complex. In just a moment, look, I'm going to share a little known fact about their training sessions that sheds a new light on their dynamic. Now look, y'all might be surprised that the majority of the comments on these stories Beardy is telling about Bruce Lee's alleged fights with Joe Louis have been surprisingly positive. Some Bruce Lee fans really want to hear the truth about Bruce Lee to the point that, well, they'll believe anything. And some of them have gone to the point of
And it's okay, so I do have to mention that up, right? So that's why I'm kind of being impartial. I'm not even really commenting on this fight back and forth with these 3 channels on YouTube, because these guys have been doing this for a while. I'm showing you the books that I own, right? So I know his techniques. I can spot the stance. I understand how Jeet Kune Do works and things of that nature. I'm not going to sit here and like second guess these guys' stories, because that should be basic research, guys. You should understand how to do research, like how the gentleman who's talking on this channel right now, he just explained that Joe Louis allegedly didn't even own a camp, and that he was working out of Chuck Norris's actual school. So those kind of things are things that it's not hard to look up. It's not hard to look up who won what tournament and where. So if you're a fan, it's one thing, but it's weird to kind of be a blinded fan where you just believe any and everything that's said about your hero, because that can create an inflated image of the hero, and it's harder to defend said hero in public when someone is seeing that all this hot air has been blown into this character, right? So you kind of have to avoid that, and the best way to avoid it is to do your own research. It doesn't take 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes to take your phone out and Google who won what tournament and so on, and who owned what school and when. Basics.
Accusing me of being obsessed with Beardy because, well, I don't hesitate to call him out on his BS Bruce Lee stories. And see, I've said this before, I'll say it again. The truth is pretty much almost always better than a lie. The truth is that when Bruce Lee first tried to meet Joe Louis outside the office at Black Belt Magazine after Joe won his first tournament at June Reed's Nationals, Joe Louis blew him off. He wasn't really interested in what Bruce Lee had to say.
Because back in those days, I didn't have a lot of respect for little guys. And if you were under 5'8", in my book, you were little. And if you were under 150 pounds, in my book, you were little. Plus, most of the Chinese styles weren't into fighting, weren't into the combat aspect of it, like the Muay Thai fighters or the point fighters of today.
And this might surprise you guys hearing this now, but back then, no one was impressed with Bruce Lee when they first saw him. He was just under 5'8", and to say he weighed 150 pounds would be generous. For a guy like Joe Louis, he probably felt a lot like some of the comments that Michael Jai White has said about Bruce Lee.
He could run across the street and dive off a table and punch Mike Tyson with all he has, and it's not going to affect him.
Usually,
All right, so now I have to address that because that's one of the biggest things that people say. I call it barbershop talk, right? You know those barbershops, right? The black barbershops where they talk about how Asian men can't take punches and Asian men can't throw a punch and so on and stuff like that. And they look at Bruce Lee, they're jealous of what he's done, and they say, oh, it's just movies and stuff like that. These are the guys that aren't going to read. This is just facts. Most men in the country, black, white, or otherwise, don't read. So they haven't picked up his books. And if you say read his books, they're going to say, I don't have to read his books because I can see him. You can see him in a movie. So it's a circular argument with these guys. They keep saying, I'm judging him by his movies. I'm judging him by his movies. I don't need to read his books. So you're going to run into a situation where these guys are going to be saying what Michael Jive White is saying. Michael Jive White he specializes in karate, not kung fu. So it's a different realm for him. He doesn't understand the mechanics behind kung fu, and he doesn't understand how it works. Coming from a background of reading this man's books for years and understanding the dynamics and understanding physics, yes, Bruce Lee's a small person back in the day. He was very small when he was alive. He doesn't have the same weight behind his punch initially that somebody like Mike Tyson would have. Understanding boxing and actually studying Mike Tyson's style is actually my favorite style of boxing. I love the peekaboo stance. Shout out to you Costamato fans. Costamato, rest in peace. You did amazing. You performed art, sir. You performed arts. It's a beautiful art. The peekaboo stance is something else, right? But in every situation, the boxing stance relies on kind of almost unbalancing yourself so that when you can lean into your punch and literally put all your body weight behind. Michael Jive White is coming from that standpoint where he's saying, oh, well, this guy only has 150 pounds max behind his punch. There's no way he can unbalance himself and kind of fall into the punch the way you would normally do when you're punching and you're throwing your hooks and things, right? That's the idea. Kung Fu isn't like that. Kung Fu isn't like that. That's the thing. They're using different techniques. Bruce Lee talked about footwork. He talked about fencing for a reason. We already talked about his body alignment and how he is able to put so much thrust behind his punch. Believe me, he would use that to his advantage, but it's more than that, right? This is where the physics come in, right? You might say physics, well, it's just heavier is heavier no matter what. Yes, that's true. However, you forget about the idea of inertia, right? Inertia is a property where the faster something moves, the more force it has behind it. This can be demonstrated when a car is going down the road and you slam on brakes. The faster you go, the more you go forward. That is the principle of inertia, right? Bruce Lee was one of the fastest fighters that ever lived. His hands were basically liquid lightning, right? This is one of the things that made Muhammad Ali so powerful, but from not just being a heavyweight, but also having fast hands, right? Michael Jive White in an actual fight with Bruce Lee, if they were at the same age or at the same health, because Bruce Lee is considerably older than Michael Jive White, so his speed would have fallen down. Even boxers like to retire right around 40, so this is all hypothetical. It would never happen, but let's just say they were on the same level of health. Bruce Lee's speed is such that he would be able to hit Michael Jive White. He would be able to hit Michael Jive White probably 3 times before he can even move in his direction, right? And now you're going to see evidence of that, because I want you to, if you looked at this video hard enough, you saw the little things that Joe Louis did where he was punching the guy in the face. That to me is a sign that he had been touched by Bruce Lee in the face like that as well, right? The idea, what does Jeet Kune Do mean, right? Well, let me grab this book again. What does Jeet Kune Do mean, right? What does Jeet Kune Do mean? Jeet Kune Do is the way of the intercepting fist. Intercepting fist. I'm going to say it again. Intercepting fist. When Michael Jive White goes to move in to close distance, because for you actual fighters out there, you already know this. I'm preaching to the choir with that. But for you guys who are learning fighting, you have to move in and out of range. Bruce Lee's techniques in Jeet Kune Do are such that if you move into range, he can counter you. So you're basically stepping into a fist that's moving at extreme speed. Do you know the kind of damage that can do to someone who steps into a punch? Many boxers have been knocked the hell out, not because of the force of the muscles of the boxer, and almost not because of the footwork and the and the torque that they were generating from their core muscles. It was because they stepped into a car accident almost, right? They stepped into those bones smashing up against their skull. So the way of the intercepting fist takes the principle of inertia and takes the intercepting principle and combines them to create the force you need for knockout punches. Now, if this sounds like it's something that is way out there and you don't understand, keep watching. Watch Joe Louis. Listen to what Joe Louis has to say later on in this video about being intercepted. Watch how he uses the intercepting fist technique and times people and counters them as they come into range. Range and footwork, so important. To me, it trumps muscles all day long. In fact, muscles can actually slow you down. And I just had to stop it. I just had to cover that because I feel like that's something that people are missing when it comes. They say, "Oh, he's small. He can't hit. He can't punch." Don't let that size fool you guys. Inertia, intercepting will knock the shit out of you if you're not prepared for it. I mean, look at Floyd Money Mayweather. Is he the tallest man in the world? Come on, guys. Come on. Use your head.
People's attitudes quickly changed after they saw what Bruce Lee could do, but for Joe Louis, well, it took a little bit more than that. What he saw was what other people could do after they trained with Bruce Lee. See, Joe Louis was doing a routine at clubs with Mike Stone, and they included some karate as they were hoping to break into Hollywood. Something that gets overlooked in all the talk about how these guys were real fighters because they competed in tournaments and Bruce Lee didn't, was that they were not getting paid to compete in any of these tournaments prior to 1968, whereas Bruce Lee, he was getting paid to play Kato on the Green Hornet. He was getting paid a whole lot more than they were to win tournaments after 1968. But anyway, Joe started to notice that Mike had a lot of new moves, and after a while he asked where Mike had picked up the new stuff. Mike mentioned that he was training with this guy Bruce Lee, and he said that Bruce was trying to get in touch with Joe. Now, what I've heard is that, well, Bruce Lee and Mike Stone were just working out together and that's it. This isn't true. I recently saw pages from Bruce Lee's planner that confirmed that Mike Stone was actually a Jeet Kune Do student. And of course, our focus in this video is on Joe Louis and not Mike Stone. But I'm saying this because, well, it's relevant to what was really happening with Bruce Lee and Joe Louis. And this isn't talked about enough when people talk about their relationship. So Joe Louis didn't just start working out with Bruce Lee. They were doing private sessions at Bruce's house, not at some gym owned by Joe Louis like Beardy said in his videos. Joe Louis was a Jeet Kune Do student. At tournaments, they were announcing Joe Louis as representing Jeet Kune Do and Bruce Lee as his coach, his trainer, his teacher, whatever word you want to use. Bruce was it. Now, Joe was quite literally Bruce Lee's crash test dummy. If Bruce had some idea, he'd train that with Joe, and then he'd pretty much send him off to compete in a tournament to test their ideas out. They go back in the lab, they tweak some things based on Joe's performance. And the reason that Joe Louis was able to transition to do kickboxing was largely because of what Bruce Lee taught him. If you read about Joe Louis, people will say that when he was fighting initially, he only had his side kick and his back fist, and this was enough for him to win most tournaments. What he didn't have before he started training with Bruce Lee was footwork, timing, and being able to judge distance as far as moving in.
There you go. So he just mentioned it: distance, footwork, timing, the way of the intercepting fist. That is what would settle the difference between this hypothetical fight between Michael Jive Wright and Bruce Lee. Like, guys, the only way for you to see it my way, if you're like one of the hardcore fans of Michael Jive Wright, like, Did you even know who Joe Louis was? Do you understand the difference between Joe Louis and Michael Jai White? Do you understand what this gentleman who's talking right now on the video just said? He just said that Joe Louis, who's considered the best karate person in American history, was training with Bruce Lee. Why would you think that Michael Jai White, who was probably nowhere near these guys' ability, why would you think that he could even come close? Come on, guys. Come on. I know you want to be prideful about your guys. I know that he's like all we got as black folks, but that's it. Like, he just wasn't on their level. He wasn't even on Mike Stone's level, probably. Come on, guys. Come on. Like, it's right here in front of you. Like,
and out of striking ranges. That's the reason Vic Moore, who was much smaller than Joe, was able to beat him in 1968. In Joe's words, he couldn't chase people who wanted to play tag and then run away from him for the rest of the match, and then win on points. Anyway, Bruce and Joe trained together for roughly 2 years from 1967 to 69. Joe Louis's ex-wife was the reason that they fell out. She said Bruce made a pass at her while she was putting highlights in his hair. Joe immediately stormed off to confront Bruce after hearing about the alleged incident. Well, when Joe asked Bruce about what his wife said, Bruce called Linda into the room and asked Joe to repeat the claim to her. At that point, Joe just dropped his head, went home, and he and Bruce Lee never spoke again. So you see, there was never a fight that ended their friendship. It was just Joe's wife at the time saying something out of jealousy because she didn't like how much time Joe was spending with Bruce. This incident happened sometime in 1969, and by the time Bruce Lee made Way of the Dragon, it had been about 3 years since Bruce and Joe Louis last spoke. So the stories about them falling out over Joe not being cast as Colt in Way of the Dragon are not true at all. Joe was never considered for that part, and according to some recent information shared by Alex Richter over on the Kung Fu Genius show, Chuck Norris wasn't even the original choice for that character either. Now look, I don't fault Beardy for spreading the story about Joe Louis turning down the role of Colt because, well, I have interviews where Joe seems to imply that he was up for consideration or that Bruce really wanted to cast him in the role over Chuck Norris. So like I said, these stories about Joe Louis and Bruce Lee having locker room fights that ended their friendship, or fights after some tournament to prove that Jeet Kune Do works, or even falling out over a movie role. These are just made up stories from Beardy to trick people into believing his made up nonsense about Bruce Lee. But what if I told you that the intensity of their relationship eventually did lead to a real fight, one that was witnessed by only a few people? So next I'm going to reveal what really happened during that fight and why it was kept under wraps for so long. Now, there actually was a real fight between Bruce Lee and Joe Louis, but this fight was actually witnessed by Herb Jackson, one of Bruce's students at the Los Angeles JKD school. John Little talked about it on one of the first episodes of the Kung Fu Genius show, and he also wrote about it in his recent book, Wrath of the Dragon.
see, I like how this gentleman has the receipts. He has the receipts, right? I'm not going to jump into this Birdie fight. I'm not going to jump into this real Bruce Lee fight channel debate. It looks like he's having a debate between two other channels. But if those guys don't have receipts, that's why I'm holding up my books. If you don't have your books and things, if you can't cite literal documentaries, what are you doing? You're telling stories, right? And that's fine to tell stories, but you should be clear about the information that you're pushing. Just say this is Bruce Lee story time. This is stories that may or may not be true, or just say this is Bruce Lee entertainment. You don't have to state it as facts. That's my opinion if you ask me about all this.
Now, there was some stuff leading up to the fight that Herb Jackson witnessed that might add a little bit of context to what I'm going to tell you guys. So hold on. I promise I'm going to get to the fight. But anyway, remember when I said that Joe was literally Bruce Lee's crash test dummy? Yeah, well, Joe was starting to not like that. And this is kind of the same thing that happened with Bruce Lee and Mike Stone. So when Joe started running off all these victories at karate tournaments, people were forgetting that he was already a champion. They said it was all because of whatever he was training with Bruce Lee. So there was at one tournament, Joe was finally fed up and he put down his style as Okinawan Tay instead of Jeet Kune Do, and he lists his instructor as John Korab instead of Bruce Lee. Well, Bruce was there at that tournament as Joe's coach, and he didn't say anything at all at the time. Well, later, Bruce decided to drop by the Los Angeles Jeet Kune Do school for an after-hours training session with Ted Wong, Herb Jackson, and Joe Louis. Now think back to Bruce Lee's demonstration at the 1967 Long Beach Internationals, where they put on gear and they did full contact sparring. For some reason, all these people on YouTube talk about that demonstration as if it was a real fight. It wasn't. It was a demo to show that they did full contact sparring, something that was unheard of back then. Well, anyway, Bruce told Herb to lace up the gloves and spar with Joe Louis. And now at this point, Joe is the reigning national karate champion and probably a few other titles from some lesser tournaments. He's in his 20s and he's a heavyweight. Herb is in his 40s and he's smaller than Bruce Lee. This was a real David versus Goliath matchup, and this time David was not about to come out on top. Joe Louis completely dominated Herb Jackson, and then to add insult to injury, Joe smacked Herb with an open palm strike to his ear, and Herb says that, well, he thought Joe popped his eardrum and his ear was ringing for about 3 weeks later. Well, Bruce really didn't like that Joe intentionally hurt one of his students, and as Joe was about to undo his gloves, well, Bruce told him to hang on. He walked over to where they kept the gear, and Bruce laced up a pair of gloves and motioned for Joe Louis to square up with him. Now, according to Herb Jackson, Bruce put on the gloves and Joe Louis could not touch him at all. Bruce Lee hit Joe Louis all over. He kept hitting him in the face and Joe Louis just could not touch Bruce Lee. Later, Bruce told Herb that he put on the gloves to spar with Joe Louis just to let Joe know that he does not have all the answers. And now apparently, this wasn't the only time that Bruce humiliated Joe Louis during a sparring session because, well, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar also talked about seeing Bruce spar with Joe. Kareem said that Bruce had fun just putting Joe Louis down and showing him that he was not going to beat everybody. He said Joe had this attitude that he was going to beat everybody he fought, but he was just too slow for Bruce. He said Bruce liked to have fun with Joe, and Joe could never figure out exactly what was going on, and, well, he thought it was kind of funny. Well, there's this one person who's always leaving comments in my videos saying that Bruce Lee never sparred with Joe Louis, they only did drills, and
I never sparred Mr. Lee. There have been some rumors out there that Mr. Lee and I had sparred.
well, I guess the name of this particular drill was, can Joe Louis stop Bruce Lee from punching him in the face over and over and over and over again? How you like that drill, cuz? But I mean, it really makes you think twice about what Joe had to say about Bruce, and one of the few times he wasn't trying to claim Bruce Lee wasn't really a fighter compared to karate point sparring champions from his era.
I know how hard Bruce Lee could hit. I know how fast he was because he nailed me. And I've always told people, I know what real Jeet Kune Do was because I got popped with it a few times.
So here's a question for you guys. After hearing...
There you go. There you go. So he explained it, Michael Jive White. He explained it, Michael Jive Whiteites. For you guys who talking about he can't hit. I've explained the science behind it. I've explained the physics behind it. And now you heard it from Joe Louis's mouth himself, because he was hit in the mouth by it. He understands the power of the intercepting fist. He understands the timing. These are the ways that make someone who might be a little smaller be able to use the force of inertia, the force of combining someone stepping into a punch and making more destructive power. And then also some people would say that Bruce Lee in his time was a bodybuilder in and of itself. So tightening all those muscles at once created almost like a powerful whip that he can lash out and create this tremendous amount of force whenever he needed to. And you heard it from people. This isn't some movie thing right now. This is the truth, guys. You've got several people telling you right here, right now. Hopefully you guys survive this long into the video so you can learn the actual truth, that he wasn't just a movie star. He was a movie star because he needed to pay bills. He could have been in these tournaments, but he would have won nothing in the tournaments.
Eyewitness accounts from people who saw Bruce spar with Joe Louis. Why do you think guys like Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and Bob Wall later talked down about Bruce's fighting abilities? I mean, why did they bring up their success at karate point sparring tournaments as some indicator of superiority when it sounds like Bruce completely took these guys apart when there wasn't an audience? And then Bruce never felt the need to brag about it. But does hearing that Bruce Lee had his way with Joe Louis change the way that you think about Bruce's actual skills when the movie cameras weren't around? Well, hearing what Bruce did to Joe actually sounds very similar to the story about Bruce sparring with heavyweight boxing contender Joey Orbio that I shared in a previous video.
I gotta cover that one.
Fast was fast, but when you cannot see, you know, what can you say? I mean, fast is fast, right? But you're not seeing it.
And it also supports what judo.
Did you just hear that? Did you guys? This is a boxer, right? Michael. That's why I keep laughing at Michael Jai White, because it's flipping ridiculous for him to even think he can come close. But listen to what he just said. He mentioned Bruce Lee running across the street, jumping off a table, and hitting Mike Tyson with all the power. Mike Tyson would never see the punches coming. He would not see the punches coming. You just heard a boxer tell you what happened. Oh my goodness, guys.
Champion Hayward Nishioka has said numerous times about Bruce Lee. In one interview, Hayward said, as far as sparring with Bruce goes, he just played with us. I mean, I could move around, but I could never match him. He was just too fast. He was just too fast for us. Well, if you like these kinds of stories about Bruce Lee's real fights and challenges, you should check out this video about what really happened when Bruce Lee sparred with a Goju-Ryu karate master. And if these stories sound really intense, we'll wait until you hear about Bruce Lee's showdown with the top Kung Fu stuntman in the next video in this series. It's a pretty interesting story that'll set up a bunch of other challenges Bruce experienced in Hong Kong while he was making movies. So stay tuned for more interesting stuff about Bruce Lee, and I hope you...
Oh my gosh, there's so much stuff to cover here, guys, but I'm just gonna end the video quickly, but I do want to bring up one thing. This stuff should be easier for you to understand at this point. Like, if you gotten to this point now, you should hopefully have been enlightened a little bit about the man, the myth, the legend, and what he used and how he employed these techniques, how he allowed people to walk into punches, how he timed people, how his speed in and of itself can generate knockdown power. The way he trained, like, hey, you can see him right there. Like, look at that. This is calisthenic stuff. Like, if he's able to lift his legs like that, those abs, the core muscles gotta be incredibly strong. He makes those noises just like a boxer would with that. A kickboxer would make those noises to tighten those muscles in order to create a lashing hit. And finally, the most damning thing about Kung Fu versus karate is that Kung Fu is said to have come from early karate is said to have come from early Kung Fu. There was an exchange of actual techniques between the Japanese and the Chinese. And lastly, I will tell you this: with the Ip Man movies, a lot of you guys have been privy to this, but Kung Fu was kind of engineered to take Japanese karate apart. So this is one of the reasons why he was so fast when it was coming. When he dealt with Mike Stone and Joe Louis, and when he dealt with British boxers, because number one, British boxers don't even use boxing. They don't use all of their weapons, as Bruce Lee's book would call it. You know, the Thai, at least the Thai, use their elbows. They use their head. You know, boxing is a very limited ability. However, I don't discount boxing too far, because I do feel like you need to have a really good understanding of any kind of striking art. Boxing is one of the best striking arts you can understand, but make no mistakes, you are limiting yourself to just using two weapons when you have several more. So we're going to cover more here on this channel, especially if you guys like it. If you like content like this, please don't forget to hit that like button. It definitely helps the channel. YouTube rewards that kind of engagement. If you have any questions, if you think I'm just flipping crazy, put it down below. Put it down there. I want to see what you think. Tell me why you think Mike Tyson couldn't. Why you think Mike Tyson could just destroy Bruce Lee, or vice versa. Put down below why you think Michael Jai White could knock Bruce Lee out, you know, in this hypothetical, if they were both in the prime of their life and they were fighting. Explain it. The guy who was in this video has showed you the receipts. I've showed you the receipts. I've talked to you about body alignment. Tell me what you have to say down below. I know you got lots to say. Put it down there. Guys, nurture your spirit. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. I will see you in the next video.